Chapter 28, Evan Donnelly. You don't have to explain to me why CJ's acting weird about us being here. When Mom and Dad went into rehab, I didn't want anybody to know, and everybody knew. In a town the size of Canaan, that kind of gossip is like there's a town crier standing under your window screaming it to the four winds. I could see it in the eyes of the people who were practically strangers. There they are, the Donnelly boys. They're with the grandparents now. No, the parents are still alive. They just care more about getting high than raising their own sons. The mail carrier, the crossing guard at the elementary school, the ticket taker at the movies. It was like having your chest split open and the whole town having a periscope trained on your insides. The most private parts of you are on the tip of everybody's tongue. And not because they give a hoot, but because it's interesting, even fun for them. I hated it. It was humiliating, and that wasn't the worst part. It's one thing to be embarrassed because your shorts split open in gym class, but when the embarrassment comes because your whole world is crashing and burning, that's more agony than any kid should have to deal with. I liked Grandma and Grandpa okay, but my parents were gone without so much as a backward glance at Luke and me. I didn't even want my friends to find out, guys I'd been closer than close with as long as I could remember. It was Luke who told me, if your friends are real friends, they won't give you a hard time. And he was right. And to this day, they never bring up the subject except to support me when I need to talk about it. Not even Mitchell, who normally can't keep his mouth shut about anything. That's friendship. Those are the kind of guys you share a fort with. I still think about those dark days a lot. Sometimes it feels like I haven't totally gotten over them. And they come back to me with a vengeance while Mrs. Sciuto is explaining how they're finally leaving Marcus. But they have to be careful because he can be really dangerous. I look at CJ, scared and humiliated, everything he ever considered secret laid open like a book for anyone to read. And I ache for him so deeply that it's like my own worst times are starting all over again. Listen, man, I tell him, hoping my voice isn't as husky as it sounds inside my head. I know what it's like to be caught up in something that's out of your control. And he glances away, and so I add, I remember. His eyes widen a little, and I realize that he's never made the connection before. On the surface, this Marcus business is completely different from what happened with my parents. But to be a kid twisting in the wind, suffering the consequences and yet powerless to change the outcome, yeah, I can relate to that. Anything we can do to help, just ask, Ricky chimes in. Or you could ask one of your real friends, Mitchell volunteers, glaring at Ricky. CJ doesn't notice the tension between them. Thanks, guys, he mumbles, without meeting our eyes. And I get it. Some things are just too uncomfortable. How must it feel to stand there in front of your friends while your mom calls women's shelters looking for a place to hide? To make matters worse, Marcus is home from work now, and he seems to sense that something's up. He's bombarding his wife with endless calls, leaving messages that are growing increasingly agitated. Obviously, Mrs. Sciuto doesn't play them for us, but it's impossible to ignore the anger spilling out of the phone. He's furious, threatening. Constant ping, ping, ping of his texts echoing in the confined space is driving me crazy, so I can only imagine what it must be doing to CJ and his mom. I think back to CJ's daredevil career and the injuries that we believed were coming from those stunts. The scrapes, the bruises, the black eyes, the almost broken ribs. We rolled our eyes and even laughed when our friend showed up sporting yet another bloody nose or a cut that went halfway to the bone. But now that we know the real source of the damage, hearing that enraged voice secondhand is enough to drop a cold silence over all of us. Dangerous. That's the word Mrs. Sciuto used to describe her husband. If it wasn't for the fort, CJ and his mom would have no place to run to. Their very safety depended on Ricky randomly noticing a metal hatch in the underbrush on the day after Hurricane Leo. He could so easily have missed it, and then where would we be? I tried to put a comforting hand on CJ's shoulder. He's too uptight and shrugs me away.